Cristina Azevedo from IAM employee.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing this second LCB meeting and for inviting me. I'm happy to be here, and I hope we'll have interesting interactions based on the talks, but also in between the talks. I was talking with Julien about the possible theme of my presentations, and we come out with this idea of presenting different utilizations of IMU sensors in NFS. I will see if you understand what I want to do without making it too much a catalog. So we just interrupt me, ask questions, because if not, it will be maybe a little bit boring. So Amine said it, we are a team coming in Montpellier that belongs both to INRIA Institute, which is a public institute, and the LIRM laboratory, which belongs to CNRS and University of Montpellier. The laboratory is mainly dedicated to engineering, informatics, robotics, and microelectronics, but our team is for some years now working in biomedical engineering. The team research purpose is about movement assistance. So we have a good experience in movement exploration and analysis using different techniques from motion capture systems to quite invasive approaches. And this is always done to serve the movement assistance and restoration. And similarly, we are working with the non-invasive FES stimulation and also invasive solutions with neuroprosthetic devices. But today I will concentrate in external devices only. All the work I will present here is always done in collaboration between many people, between researchers, engineers, but also clinicians, industrial partners, and of course the participants that accept to participate to our studies. And we always try to have a kind of brainstorming together before starting with a new project. So we all in this room know what FES is, and when we started the team, the main problem we had was to adapt existing devices to our research projects. We started working with the drop foot systems, where most of you know we have a foot switch in the shoe. When you raise the foot, the stimulation starts. We have the good presentation before to explain this. And the dorsiflexors are stimulated until the leg goes back to the ground. This is quite simple. It works in the devices. But if you want to do something more complex, like adapting the stimulation timing or parameters to other parameters, there's no real device available for research. So we started like this, improving what we had, and little by little getting experience on this. From the beginning, we wanted to have ecological studies. So this means have ambulatory devices. So we always try to minimize the number of sensors we put on the participant and always use wearable sensors. There are different possibilities, but today I will concentrate in the inertial sensors. So most of you know what an inertial sensor is. Usually it embeds at least two types of sensors, accelerometers and gyrometers, and sometimes magnetometers. It depends on the device you will use. With this information, you can either use individual information depending on your purpose, or fusion all the information, combine the information to have a more global information on your movement. The principle here is, I will go very quickly. So we have accelerometer that if you integrate twice, you will get to displacement of the segment where you placed your IMU. If you use the gyrometer, you can get the rotational angle of your segment. And if you add information from the magnetometer, you can have also the heading. In most of the devices now, you have really the two first sensors only. So if you use this different information, you can get to the position, bank, attitude, and heading of your segment. Okay? So this means that you can follow up the evolution of your segment in the space. Using different representations, either angles, Euler angles, or quaternions. And if you mix, for instance, two of these sensors, you will be able to get other information like a joint angle. This is simple, just to say that this is the type of information you can use. You should not forget that you can use the raw data or the combined information, depending on your purpose. So since many years now, we have been working with this type of sensors for different purposes, and we have a quite good experience and algorithms now that are available, going from gate partitioning to get the gate events, to posture analysis of a person, stride parameter calculation, stride length, stride height, joint angle estimation, and 3D motion reconstruction in healthy individuals, but we validate this a lot in different deficient gaits. So this is what we have as a background and what we try to use for FES now. Just for information, there are some available algorithms here that we put online for free. If you want to use them, you can go there. So we have validated a lot of algorithms in different populations, stroke, Parkinson, spinal cord injured patients, and this is what we use now for our controllers. So today what I will try to do is to illustrate how we can use these inertial sensors for different FES applications that we'll try to look at. And I will not enter into all the details of technical and mathematical implementation. There's a lot of papers dealing with that we can discuss after, just to try to have a kind of general brainstorm of how we could improve the controllers of FES to go further in how we can use them. So first we'll look at how we can trigger FES based on a simple acceleration signal. The initial idea, we used to work a lot with the lower limb stimulation in complete paraplegic individuals. Either you will see implanted or with surface stimulation in the two videos. And from this experience, what the result is to say, okay, this is something possible. It's not really practical at all. But just looking at the sit-to-stand initiation here, you will see that there's a big problem. The limbs really have to have a big, I don't know why there's some sound, participate a lot. There's overload on the shoulders, and this is not good at all. So the work we did here, it was in 2012, I guess, was to try to improve the sit-to-stand transfer by reducing the load on the shoulders of the individual. So we stimulate, you can see the muscles glutei, hamstrings, quadriceps, sometimes not always tibialis. And to reduce these efforts, if a healthy person tries to sit to stand, you will see that you need to use the trunk inertia to stand up if you want to avoid using too much arms. So sometimes what we forget when we have this type of application of FES is that we should not consider only the lower limbs that we stimulate, but the whole body. Because if you want to sit to stand, you need the participation of the person, either by the arms or the trunk, and this is on this voluntary reaction. So you could optimize what you want on the legs. If the global body is not involved, you will not optimize anything at the end. So the idea was to see how to coordinate upper and lower body during the sit to stand, and to trigger the lower limb stimulation based on the trunk information. So we did a small setup. So we have a person sitting, stimulation on the legs. We have 4 sensors here on the bars. And you can see here old inertial sensor. And we are using only the forward acceleration as the information. Because it's here, usually when we work with sit to stand and posture with the spinal cord injured individuals, we always like to have a screen where they see their profile to help them locate themselves in the space. So this is not useful for my study now, but I just wanted to point out. So what we did is that by observing the trunk acceleration, we could decide when to stimulate the legs. So you could stimulate at the maximum acceleration after or before, for instance. And we worked on comparing the effect of the FES timing on the stimulation. And just to illustrate, I put a small video here where you will see the difference between 2 timing events, one too late, one at a good time. And you can see that with the exact same parameters, we change nothing. Only in the first case, you stimulate by chance, manually. And in the second one, we stimulated just before the maximum acceleration. And this changed completely, in fact, the posture. So that's what I wanted to illustrate it. It's important to use here inertial sensors, but whatever sensors, to always try to have a collaboration between the voluntary and the artificially controlled motion, especially in posture. All the details are available in different articles. So this was the most simple application I could...
That would excuse me,
yes?
That would mean that it depends, you have to calibrate for each person Because each person, it'll depend on each person's ability.
Exactly.
They're using their volunteer, whatever is left. Right?
And you train and you improve and you change with the time. So what we are doing is that at first we were recording on a manually triggered movement the sit to stand. We asked the person to train with this, and we got a reference acceleration signal from the trunk, and this is what we use to trigger after. So this is what you should change with time. You could modify the reference pattern by the previous sit to stand movement. Yes.
Because there'll never be almost like this time is in the last talk, there's not a one fix for everyone. There's going to have an
Yes.
adaptation.
But something that I will try also to say it in the other applications I will show, it's quite amazing, but in fact it's really reproductive. Once a person does the movement and gets used to it, it will be really similar. Because you don't have many ways to sit to stand. So once you get, so you could train a person to improve, that's what we are saying here. Try to really send your trunk in forward, and we trained before. But once this is done, there's not so many changes. So you could update, but yes, the reference pattern is individually tuned. But from this, the timing is just linked to the maximum of the acceleration. So it's quite, but you're right. So the second study I wanted to show was how to trigger the stimulation based on gate events this time. So this is a work done with Parkinson's disease patients that have freezing of gait. So the freezing of gait, probably many of you have already seen, is when someone wants to go forward and suddenly starts to step in place and could not go forward anymore. It's one of the big causes of falls for this population. And there's a lot of work in the literature to try to detect this freezing of gait. What is interesting is that it's possible to reduce the freezing of gait events, the number of freezing of gait events, and also improve the gait pattern by sending to the person auditory or visual cueing. This is something well known in the literature. So you could, for instance, have a kind of metronome in the hearing, and this helps the person to maintain a rhythm. You could have a line in front of your cane, and when the person sees the line, it helps person to go forward. So there are different cueing techniques that exist. And in this study, the neurologist we were working with wanted to test if stimulation cueing was efficient for this purpose. So we placed electrode, so it's not really functional electrical stimulation, it's more electrical stimulation for cueing now. So we placed 2 electrodes, and this one on the arch of the foot was sending a small signal the person could perceive at a good time to send us information to help the person to go on with this walking rhythm. So the stimulation had to be triggered at heel off, and we used one inertial sensor placed on the foot to extract this information of the heel off. To obtain the heel off event, we mixed information from accelerometers and gyrometers only. The idea was to detect the stationary state based on these 2 informations. So either the foot is flat on the ground and it's stationary, either it starts to move and you detect that it's the heel off event. And this, with this one sensor on the foot, was able to give us the information to start stimulation, stop stimulation, only based on the 2 sensors. We compared, so stimulating, not stimulating, sorry, I will go back. So first the person has to work with no stimulation, then with stimulation on the arch of the foot, and again with no stimulation. Because with these patients, the problem is that there's a lot of modifications within time, depending on how they feel and different events. They can start to freeze and then stop for 1 hour, and you don't know what. So it's important to have always a controlled situation at the end. I don't know if the video will work. So you can see that in the middle is working quite faster, and it doesn't freeze at the turn around. Of course, this is a good patient. It's not always as nice as a result. But this is a study that was done in 12 patients, and we compared these results using this technical solution. So here my idea is not to really discuss on the positive effects or not on the gait performance, but just to show that with one unique, yes?
Just a question regarding the effect. So you stimulate every step?
Every step.
Or only you detect previews?
No, here
There's no accommodation.
this study was just to prove the feasibility of, so yes, queuing, the problem with queuing with Parkinson is that within time there's accommodation. So we have another work on freezing detection based on inertial sensors that we have to mix. But here it was just to show that one sensor is able to give you the gate events and you, with the wireless sensor and to trigger the AVS system. Yes? No question? So this was, again, a simple triggering. And now what I want to show you is using joint angles to control the stimulation. Any question? Okay. So this can be in continuation with the previous talk. So we are talking about post-stroke hemiplegic individuals in early phase of rehabilitation. And as was explained before, usually the studies are more working on the drop foot problem. And the question from the medical doctor in the clinic, La Chataigneraie Clinic was, is it possible to give more confidence to a patient by giving more stiffness to the deficient knee to allow the patient to report his weight on this deficient leg to improve the rehabilitation effects? Until now, the existing solutions are either passive orthotic joint locking, so you have a kind of orthosis you put around the knee, you can fix the angle, and so the person can walk safely, but the knee is completely stiff. Or electrical stimulator, like the Bioness, that allows to stimulate either quadriceps, either hamstring. Not both at the same time for the available device. So what we wanted to have is something that would allow to have the same effect than the passive orthotic device, but that will free the leg during the swing phase. So only during the stance phase, the leg should be stiff. So objectives are to secure the knee by preventing the hyperextension and also to allow the secured weight transfer onto the weak leg. And we compared between no stimulation plus orthotic system and stimulation. How it works. At the beginning, we define a desired angle knee for the patient that he should have when he's standing in the stance phase. Based on this, we stimulate either quadriceps, either hamstrings to maintain this desired angle in the stance phase. So you have to detect the stance phase and then to ensure that if you hyperextend or hyperflex, control this knee angle to ensure the patient that he will be in a safe position to report his weight. So this is a simple controller model I have after the algorithm. And then the gain that controls the pulse width of the stimulation is automatically adjusted based on this difference between the desired angle and the ongoing angle. You can see here the algorithm. So if you are in stance phase, okay, you can, depending on the knee angle, decide to stimulate either the quadriceps, either the hamstrings. And you could also, in the pre-stance phase that you can detect, allow to stimulate a little bit the hamstrings to reduce the hyperextension. You can see here the setup. So we have a small controller as a Raspberry, and then it's linked to a stimulator and to inertial sensors that are described here. We use also pressure insoles to detect the stance phase. And then we just measure this knee angle, and based on the knee angle during stance phase, we control the stimulation. So you can see here an example. So here you have the ongoing knee angle with this desired position for the stance phase. Stance phase is detected. If the knee angle is over the limit, you stimulate quadriceps. If it's under the limit, you stimulate hamstrings, and then the stance stop and you stop stimulation. So this was applied on 12 participants. What is interesting, again, as tuning at the beginning, is that the only thing you have to tune is the stimulation maximum intensity you want to apply for this given individual, and also this desired position during stance that you have to see with the patient and the physician. Based on this, the other parts are completely automatic. Okay. And you can see maybe a little bit here that it's not only triggering on-off, there's a kind of modulation of the stimulation based on the angle observation to maintain the angle in the desired position. Is that clear? Okay. In fact, this project was done initially to be applied in cerebral palsy children with Jessica Rose in Stanford. And it's the starting point to test because going to children is something a little bit tricky for the moment. And our idea is to apply exactly the same approach but to different joint angles and for the physician to be able to say, I want to stimulate before the maximum joint peak angle or after. We can really draw all the pattern of the stimulation you would like to apply safely and robustly. We applied exactly the same approach to cycling. So this is something we have finished right now as a study. So during FES cycling, what is classically done is to use an encoder placed in the crank of the cycling device. And based on the position of the pedal, the stimulation is triggered in the different muscles you want to stimulate. The difficulty with this is that your pattern is associated to the bike you are using. It's difficult to generalize. And when there are some changes on the position of the patient, you should improve by modifying the timing. So there was a work from Thomas Schauer group 2 years ago where they showed that they could, instead of using a crank encoder, they could use inertial sensors to pilot the stimulation. It was a very interesting publication that you can find easily. And so the idea was to maximize the genericity and usability and to really base your pattern design on the individual, the pilot himself, and not on the bike. So based on this work that we thought was quite interesting, we tried to simplify further the solution. In their work, they were using knee angle, so sensor on the shank and on the thigh of both legs, and a small geometrical model to go from this information to the crank pedal. What we did is we forgot completely about the crank. So there's only 2 sensors, one on each thigh. We only look to thigh inclination, not the knee, so we have only 2 sensors, and there's no geometrical model. So it's the same principle than the study I showed before with stroke patients. In fact, we observe the evolution of the thigh angle, and we detect the maximum flexion and extension based on the thigh angle. And from this, we can decide to trigger the stimulation. So only this angle is observed. I will show you a graphic after that is easier. So we did only a test on one pilot, Jérôme, for those who know him, because he was the only one trained at the moment. So this will be applied in other pilots. And it was quite interesting because so we applied the algorithm. We only tuned the stimulation parameters, and it worked immediately, just stimulating at the peak angle. You can see here a small graphic. So you have here the thigh angle. Red is for the right, green is for the left. Okay, the legs are here. And you can see in bold here when the stimulation is applied. Okay? So in fact, we stimulate here sometime before the maximum. And it was quite repetitive. And you can see here the correspondence with the crank angle just as an illustration. So using only this thigh information, detecting the maximum angles, you can decide when to apply your stimulation based on the physiology of the person, flexion, extension, and not the pedal position, which is not very easy to go fast. It's not so easy to optimize the pattern timing. Is that more or less clear? Just to illustrate, we did some trials in the home trainer and some trials in the overground. Again, it was a very short analysis, so only one corridor and some UC cycles. And just to show the representation here in the phase plan, so here you have the angular velocity of the thigh, here the angular position of the thigh for home trainer situation and for overground situation. And what we can see is that the range of motion is similar in both cases, which is logical, but he pedals faster here than here because of the floor resistance.
When you increase speed, I mean, is there, I guess there's a limit to this, because if you go too fast, the electronics aren't going to be able to keep up with the, but is that an issue? I mean,
Yes, so we haven't changed this. For the moment, we worked with the 5 kilometers per hour that we used to have with Jérôme because we wanted to compare with the previous pattern. So this might be an issue. The only thing which is, I think, interesting is that it auto-adapts to the changes because you detect the maximum and not the, you don't have an angle threshold, the absolute angle threshold. It depends on the cycle, the previous cycle. And of course, you can have limitations with the frequency that we have to check, and I will show you after we have a proposition to improve it. It was just to say that this is not, it's not an optimal solution in terms of cycling. It's just a simpler solution that is easy to deploy and could be used easily. It doesn't change the performance of the cycling. Yes?
Just how much RPM was that?
Tu te rappelles 40, 40? It was it was the pattern we had with Jérôme during the Cyberton. We tried to have the same performance, but without taking information from the tuning of that time. So again, it's not a matter to show you any performance. It's a really simple cycling here. Only quadriceps were stimulated. Okay? Something we have done in the past, it was on gate observation, is what using the cyclic properties of movement, you can improve the robustness of your devices, of your controllers. If you have walking gait or cycling, we'll see after, it's cyclic. So this means you can expect, if you put any type of sensor in a limb, to have a kind of cyclic motion and with the periodic regime. This also means that if, of course, this is true, then you could model the movement as an oscillator, a nonlinear oscillator. You can have a representation of this movement because you know, you made the hypothesis that it's cyclic. If you have this type of oscillator, like a Van der Pol oscillator, for instance, you can build what we call an observer in automatic control that will follow the ongoing measured signal, making the assumption this model is valid. It can extract the system state. So you can have, in fact, the evolution of your cycle, making the assumption and hoping it's true, the movement is cyclic. Doing so, you can follow what we call the phase on the cycle of this movement. Okay? You can, this is also paper you can read, but we can add, for robustness purposes, isochron matrix to, in fact, allow the real system to be a little bit around the ideal cycle. And you can, for any type of movement around this, this behavior, extract the phase on the cycle of your gait or your cycling. So this means that, for instance, if you observe the Schenck inclination of a stroke patient, you will have this type of movement. Using the model I showed before, you can extract the phase evolution in red here of this movement. And based on this phase, you can decide to stimulate, for instance, here between 20 and 60% of the phase automatically. The interesting thing with this is that you don't need to have, again, an absolute threshold to trigger with an angle. You can base all your decisions on this phase that will evolve between 0% and 100% and is robust to modifications in the shape of the cycle, amplitude, and frequency. So this was done in 20 subjects in stroke some years ago. And what we are now trying to do is to apply this to the cycling application. So you can observe, using the tie inclination angle, your phase evolution, and base the stimulation triggering on this phase instead of the absolute angles again. And what you will gain is robustness and stability of your controller. We can discuss after if there are some questions. So what I wanted here simply to do for this presentation was to show that it's possible to imagine any type of setup that we would like to try for stimulation. Observing angles, observing events, it's possible, and any type of clinical question that we'll raise that we'll need for this type of setup, it's possible to do so, and we should, I think, brainstorm and go further in what we should test as protocols. Because sometimes I have the feeling that we are limited by the existing devices, existing stimulator, existing sensors, and tuning better the timing of stimulation, modulating better the parameters, I think would improve also the outcomes of our protocols. Okay, with this I will conclude my presentation. If you have questions, of course, we can discuss. Thank you. Yes?
Really interesting because, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Well, so with the last application, with the cyclic stimulation, how do you know if you're actually, in real time, if you're stimulating appropriately? That is, you can have a cyclic phenomena, but then there may be some type of a perturbation
Yes.
that could interrupt that cycle, perhaps briefly or over a long period of time. You could stumble, or the muscles can get tired, or something that could be
Yes.
at a shorter one time. What's the feedback to control that?
So there are different solutions we have investigated. First, you can imagine you have two models for two cyclic phenomena that can happen. So you can have both in parallel and change between one or the other. And then you have to put some securities to decide, okay, now I'm not anymore in a cyclic behavior, so I should switch to another control. This is, of course, yes. This works only if you are in the cyclic behavior that you have planned. If you go out, you should go back. Either you stop because it's not gate anymore. You can decide, okay, now I should not. It's the same with foot switch. If you're doing, I don't know what, there's no any more purpose of doing stimulation based on heel switch. So it's the same thing, in fact. Before applying any type of control, we should make sure that the behavior that is going on is the one we have planned to have. Same for cycling, any type of application. You always have to have a security to say, okay, now it's not cycling anymore. I stop or I do something else if I know I'm stepping in place or whatever we can imagine. Yes, but it's right.
There's an advantage with the bicycling in that fact because they're forced to do cycling.
But you could fall or you could go backwards or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, yes. Yeah.
Christine, one of the advantages of the IMU is it's easy to use, easy to deploy. The mass is pretty simple and they
Cheap.
work. But the downside is you don't really know, except by a change in speed, what the muscle's doing, and if you want to have a controller for this to increase stimulation, the IMUs tend to be weak on that. Now, the alternative approach that some have used, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, is to use devices commercially that do MMG, muscle myogram, which directly measure muscle force, give you some of the advantage of the IMUs, but have the penalty of heavy processing time to know that the muscle is being fatigued. Have you any thoughts about the comparative advantages of an MMG controller for a bike system, for example in Cyberthon, versus an IMU controller? One is easy to use, fast, the maths are simple, but you really can't know what the muscle's doing. Yeah, you know what the muscle's doing,
Yeah.
but the process time is really intensive.
What I showed today was how to simplify as much as possible to have something that can be used fast in clinics. If you're doing real research with looking to fatigue effects or so on, you should add sensors anyway. When we do cycling, I showed the inertial sensor, but we have a network of sensors with EMG, with cardiovascular information, with the foot insoles, and so on. So this depends on your aim. But if you are in a clinical context and you want to deploy fast with a given individual, not to do research, to really apply a new concept of stimulation, I think it would be really simple, and probably inertial sensors are a good solution.
Because I think the MMGs are commercially available, are $100 on the market.
Yeah, but you need to calibrate, to
Yeah.
tune, to inertial sensors you can place anywhere, here or here, and then the angle is computed. So you don't need to put care and time. But if you want to do something really precise, accurate, to get information in terms of fatigue or muscle contraction, then it's something different, but it's not the same use, I believe. Or I think in your Le sports room, like you are using, you place and you forget about it.
Yeah, we've been playing with just simple stretch sensors too, to get the angle, and then once you get the angle, you're done, because it recycles this.
Yeah.
Interesting to discuss the advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah.
We'll do that offline, of course.
Yeah.
If there's no more questions, thank you.
Merci. Okay, let's,